I heard he needed some help on the farm. Somebody with a truck and two strong arms, not scared of dirt and willing to work till the sun goes down.
After the Fall by Robin Summers is a post-apocalyptic drama centered on a lesbian romance. Overall, I didn't like it too much. Not because it's especially bad, like Chicken Nuggets, the Raptor Apocalypse, but because it doesn't do enough with its setting, and ends up an extremely average example of its genre. Part of my negative opinion may be influenced by the fact that the reason I read this book was that an LGBT site recommended it as a zombie apocalypse story. It's not. It's just a standard real-world plague story. It deals with many of the same tropes, as the zombie apocalypse plot device is fundamentally a metaphor for a plague anyway, but there are differences. They aren't fighting zombies in this book. If you see anyone calling this story a zombie apocalypse book, please correct them. The plot takes place after the Fall, with a tough survivor woman named Taylor, on a long journey on foot to the city where her family was last known to be. She happens upon a community called Burning Head Farm, which is the rare good community existing in the apocalypse. There's a bad crowd of misogynistic men who harass her, but they are soon exiled, allowing Taylor to stay there comfortably and to pursue a romance with the beautiful Kate. The secondary protagonist is a young man named Duncan, who is initially interested in Taylor, but easily moves on when he finds out that she's a lesbian. I generally consider Duncan a superfluous element. With a little rewriting, he really could have been edited out of the book entirely. The only real thing that he adds to the plot is that at one point he travels with Taylor, allowing her to open up to him about her story, when otherwise she would be alone and not have any reason to talk about her past. He's a fairly basic young man coming of age kind of character. He's been doing young man kind of jobs at the farm, but he wants to take on more adult responsibilities. There's not much more to say about him, because he really isn't that valuable a character to the plot. That said, I appreciate that he could be a straight best friend subordinate to the gay romance, mirroring the gay best friend in mainstream media, and I like that he wouldn't be troubled by the whole friend zone thing, similar to Kirsch in the Carmilla web series.
Yes! I'm in the friend zone.
What?
I have made it into the friend zone.
Are you happy about this?
Of course I am. I mean, yeah, I totally want more because, you're super smart and way tough and smoking hot, but, I get it. You're just not into me that way. And, even if you don't like me the way I like you, I still think you're awesome. You're like the Joan of Arc of us. Why wouldn't it be awesome to be your friend?
The bulk of the book is about them living on the farm. Taylor hears that the city where her family lives has been destroyed, so she decides to live at the farm. She slowly lets down her guards and is helped in her healing by Kate's confident advances. A nice romance starts to take place. The farm isn't homophobic like you might expect, and they actually encourage this relationship. They're very welcoming. There's a good sense of community on the farm. There's a school. They have big meals with lots of nice food. They entertain everyone with the big musical number, in which Taylor humorously has to keep a singer from singing Meredith Brooks' Bitch in front of the children. I mean, seeing society collapse and everyone die is one thing, but letting innocent children hear a word like bitch? Perish the thought. And they live on the farm, and they live on the farm, and they live on the Gorham farm. This is a book about the apocalypse, right? I'm serious, more than half the book is about living comfortably on the farm. The only drama comes from Taylor dealing with her PTSD and trying to decide if she wants to risk loving Kate when she might lose her in this hostile world. That's a decent narrative for the character, but the book should be about more than a traumatized character living comfortably in a farm paradise. There's so much of this world that should be explored that is just ignored for this love story between Taylor and a farm. Yeah, that's pretty much the romance at the heart of this book, Taylor and the farm, with Kate as a part of the farm. Kate is pretty much just a pretty girl who represents the good end of Taylor's story, if only she can accept it. News comes in that Taylor's family might be alive, so she decides to head out from the farm with Duncan to look for any surviving relatives. She and Duncan ride horses, and the book talks about horses a lot, with Taylor growing affectionate of them and stuff. It's not nearly as tedious as Lord Fowl's Bane, but it does drag a lot. Finally, Taylor opens up about her past, thus giving Duncan a reason for being in the story at all. Then, in the form of dialogue, we find out about what should have been the focus of the story, the fall of civilization and the collapse into savagery. She was part of a group of survivors that ended up giving power to a violent man who killed those who opposed him and led corrupted men who raped her. This story is far more interesting than just living on a farm, and it should at least have been a prose flashback given far more detail than what Taylor herself chooses to say. This is the highlight of the book, and it's a short story related from one character to another character. Taylor finds her close family dead, but extended family still alive, and they have a reunion. They end up taking a young survivor girl back to the farm with them. This girl pretty much fulfills the role of Taylor and Kate's adopted daughter for that happy ending of theirs. But then the exiled group of misogynists comes back to take revenge. They lead a siege on the farm. Oh wow, now things are getting interesting! Taylor tries to sacrifice herself to save Kate, but Duncan helps the fighters of the farm defeat the gang. Interesting part over. They mourn their losses and then rebuild. The farm is better than ever. Taylor gets to have her happy ending on the greatest farm in the world. When the army finally shows up to reestablish order, they are really impressed by this farm community, and the farm ends up being pivotal to the reconstruction of the country. All to be expected because this is the best community ever. The end. The book fails on multiple levels. First, the scope is too narrow. Zombie or otherwise, a virus-based apocalypse story looks at the world as a whole through the gaze of individual survivors or survivor communities. Communities interact with each other and have internal hierarchies. Communities are rarely self-sufficient and are dependent on trade or other means of acquisition of critical resources. Apocalypse stories take global politics and shrink them down to small powers in a small region, dealing with everything that was left behind. After the Fall barely shows any of that, instead concentrating on this utopian farm that exiles the one problematic group of guys. Taylor's backstory considers that scope, but it's only expressed through her dialogue in one scene. Next, the pacing is off. Far too much time is spent on the utopian farm. There are minimal conflicts. Taylor's story should have been a whole flashback scene, and it should have been much earlier in the book. There should have been much more tension. It's a post-apocalypse book, for goodness sake. And then the characters are just so bland. Duncan is superfluous. Kate is barely more than a woman as reward trope in a lesbian narrative. And they're just so bland. They're stock characters with stock traits and stock problems. I don't care about anyone in this book, even Taylor. From a feminist standpoint, it does hold up pretty well. I like Duncan not feeling entitled to Taylor's romance and easily sliding into the role of her friend. I like the female prominence in the narrative. I like that neither Taylor nor Kate are overly weak, and that they can have reasonable human weaknesses. The relegation of misogyny to stock misogynist bad guys is a little overly simplistic, but overall it's not a big problem. From an entertainment standpoint, however, it fails overall. I don't want to really tear it apart because it isn't a tremendous failure of the apocalypse genre like Chicken Nuggets, but it's not that good either. If I were to compare it to a meal, it's nothing I would spit out and send back to the kitchen, but it's not particularly enjoyable and would just be another day's sustenance. It basically fulfills all necessary functions, but what you want is a great and glorious feast, like The Girl with All the Gifts, not After the Fall. In the world of apocalypse literature, After the Fall is pretty much top ramen.